Welcome back, everyone. On this week's episode of Cars with Corey, we'll be working on my nephew's 2011 Mustang. He just got this car recently, has an aftermarket stereo, but he is looking to add a subwoofer. So we'll be working on that this week. So I hadn't actually seen this car yet, but he picked it up recently. It has quite a few aftermarket body parts, interior parts, and things like that. It does have an aftermarket stereo. It is a student car, so we got plenty of stuff left over from practice. But anyway, we got a couple of used amps we're going to work with. We have a subwoofer here. Don't remember what this one was. It was a kicker. Yeah, it's a kicker. So we're going to make this work, but pretty neat car. I believe it's a 2011. Still on the factory wheels. However, like I said, lots of aftermarket body parts. Looks like we got some side splitters, diffuser, some aftermarket taillights, a little rear wing there of sorts. Pretty neat interior. I actually haven't seen these kinds of seats before. I'm not sure if they're Shelby or what exactly they are, but like I said, he just got it in the last couple of weeks. A little lacking in the base department, so we're going to take care of that. Kind of neat. We got some aftermarket headlights as well. Got a Shelby grille there and a different front fascia as well. So pretty neat. It is a V6 car. The exhaust has been switched out. It's louder. It's not louder than I would ever want mine to be, but hey, I'm an old guy, so let's dig in. So starting here in the interior, someone has already done the hard work for me. I already have an aftermarket head unit, trim piece, and all of those things. Kind of a neat setup here with the double din. I believe this has Apple CarPlay and everything. So that work is already done. This car is not a premium, so not equipped with the 8-inch woofers in the doors. Would be a neat upgrade for this car, but we're gonna go right for the 12-inch. I'm not sure the status of the speakers, if they're still stock or aftermarket, but first things first, we're gonna probably pop this out. We're gonna have to run a power wire for an amp. I haven't seen one so far. It's possible this car may have had one at one point, but let's dig into that. So starting under the hood here, looks like we got a aftermarket strut tower brace. Cool. Trying to see, typically we've had an amp added before, we'll see something added on to the factory terminal. I don't see anything obvious there. At other times they'll add them right to the box here, which I also don't see anything there, so looks like we got our work cut out for us. No big deal. I believe probably the best way is, done a couple of these before, we will route a power wire essentially from our distribution box here down underneath. Looks like it's got a catch cam too. Down underneath we'll actually access the wheel well and come out a firewall plug over here on the passenger side. So before we get too much farther, I figured we'd do an assessment of what we got here. So like I mentioned before, we got a kicker sub, looks like a CVR12 in a slot ported box here. Looks like a factory box. We got a whole mess of wires. We'll have to dig through that and see what we can salvage. Got another kit in case we need it. Got a couple of amps came with the job here. We got some kind of power acoustic here, and it's like a Memphis there. I'm more of an Alpine guy myself, if you guys on the channel couldn't tell, but these should definitely work fine. Looks like we got a actually circuit breaker here on this 8-gauge wire here. And also we got fuse holder. I think this is probably 6-gauge. Looks like a big box store kit, but regardless, all stuff we can work with. Got some RCAs. Also got a bass knob. No idea which amp the bass knob is for, but it is present, so we'll probably wire that up so we can do controls from the driver's seat. So if we get loud and we see flashing lights, we can turn it down real fast. So anyway, let's get started up at the front with the power wire once we decide which one we're going to use. So before we get too much farther, I'm going to bench test the woofer. Just a simple 12-volt battery. This one's nearly dead, so not a lot of amperage going on. You can bump them with a 12-volt battery or drill battery. Just briefly, just touch it. See if the woofer bounces out. I'll kind of demonstrate here, positive to positive, negative to negative. Should be able to hear and see the sub. Looks like we're out of phase, we're pulling it in. But regardless, just a quick test, make sure the woofer at least comes out, is at least working. So you can do that. Just don't hold that on there, guys. Just, you know, touch it briefly. So since we'll be working with 12-volt electrical and have the chance of shorting open wires, first thing we're going to do, of course, is unhook the negative battery terminal. So in order to run our wire here, we had to remove the battery and factory battery box. There is a little passageway right down through here. It goes into the inner fender well, essentially right where we want to run our power wire. So we'll run it right down along kind of the factory harnesses and whatnot, cover it up in loom. Nobody will even know it's there with the exception of seeing the fuse holder up in this area. Alright, we've got the car up on the hoist now. Originally I was just going to turn the wheel to get access to the inner fender here. It could be just easier if we just zing the wheel off quick. Maybe. So we've got the car on the lift here. Skipped ahead a little bit. Couldn't get the wheel off. Can't reach my nephew right now. This is his car again, but this has special, needs a special tool to take the lug nuts off, or at least I don't want to damage them. But good news, I was able to get the inner fender off. I didn't film that because this one actually had some damage and it just kind of had some screws poking in wherever they needed to be just to hold it in. But what I mentioned earlier, we're trying to get to this grommet right here. So the battery is kind of right up in that region there. So we're going to run our cable down through this little access down here and in through the firewall there. I'll show everybody that on the other side. So here we are back inside the vehicle. Here is the grommet I mentioned outside. Pull the kick panel off here. Right in here, outside in the wheel well, we'll be very careful, cut a small, tiny little slit in that, and essentially push our power wire through, then we'll have it inside the car. Back up at the front of the car here, we have the power wire routed, fuse holder installed in line, and we're hooked to our power source here. Chose not to go to the battery. The Fords have kind of a string of wires all going together, and there's really not a whole lot of room, but right down here directly, the fuse block works just fine. Do need to stress to everyone, you need to keep your fuse, circuit breaker, whatever your failure source is in the event of a direct short, within 18 inches of your power source or your battery. Reason for that is if you happen to get into an accident, if your fuse holder's in the trunk, up here, if anything gets pinched, essentially what's going to happen is you're going to burn your wire, start a fire, make the battery explode because you're direct shorting your battery at that point. The only spot that is at risk right now is a little 10 inches from the power source directly up to the fuse block. So it's about as unrisky as you can get. So as I mentioned, ran the power wire up through here, connected to AC line, just with some zip ties, things like that. Got it routed out of the way and down underneath the battery tray and out through the inner fender here. I'll show you that on the other side. So back down here under the fender well, under the inner fender, which we removed down at the grommet I mentioned, I like to use an awl, which is essentially just a scratching tool or a poking tool. Sounds crazy, but the tiniest little hole in that will allow the wire to go through. Some people like to cut in them. I think it's a little risky. You can use a razor blade if you're very, very careful. Obviously, you don't want to cut any wires that are through there, but I'm going to go ahead and poke this through off camera and shove the wire through, and I'll be back when that's done. So back underneath here, we have successfully poked the wire through. I forgot to mention, everyone, you need to take that awl and kind of stretch the hole out. It will go through. I like doing it this way. It will be incredibly tight. Sometimes just a tiny bit of grease or something will help it slide through. But you want that extremely tight to keep a watertight seal. You certainly don't want any water or condensation getting inside of the cabin of the vehicle, especially this being on the back side of an inner fender. So we'll go ahead and pull that through and we'll start routing it back to the trunk. Alright, back inside the car, we have the wire pulled through the grommet, as you can see up there. We will route it on the other side of the cable, kind of down through our kick panel wiring, and then down through the sill plate. I've already removed the sill plate. That's a tough one, guys. There's actually this adhesive here stuck down pretty tight. So my best advice is get up underneath the interior side of it, get all of the 4 clips popped here, and then this will still be stuck. You can get some of these Harbor Freight kind of interior tools. I have a set of these. I've used them for years. Won't scratch up any paint or anything like that, but that guy will come up real hard. Just keep pulling. Careful you don't break it, but it will come up. So to remove or install the battery tray, you have 3 8mm head bolts, 2 on the top here, 1 down in there. Might recommend a vacuum to vacuum out any debris that might have got in there. So back in the wheel well, not so good at lighting, but I'm going to go ahead and seal up where I ran the wire through with this 3M heavy drip check sealer. I've used this quite a bit. It dries mostly hard, not solid, but essentially it kind of shrinks around any wires that you run through anything. I've used it before with quite a bit of success. I'm sure this can be found Amazon or buy it online. I don't remember where I got this, but I've been using it for years. Pretty good stuff. So this is one of them jobs where there's no points for how good it looks, only how effective it is. So smeared on there pretty good. As hopefully you can see, I tried to drape it around the wire so it shrinks down tight as it dries. This, like I said, should keep any water, moisture, anything from getting into the cabin. So I might have skipped ahead a little bit. Got the center console piece out. Really not difficult, especially on an automatic. The manuals are a little more difficult. You have to remove the shifter. But on the automatic, there is a chrome trim piece that just goes around here. Essentially, all you really do is open the back console and pull up on the cup holder. That will release the tabs. It was a little difficult to shimmy around the shifter. I actually had to put the battery back in so I could turn the key, move the shifter back, get it out of the way, but that pops up. There is a wire harness here that connects to the traction control, the trunk release, and I don't remember the other button. But essentially, you have 2 7mm little screws. There's one on this side, one on the other side, underneath all the peripherals there. And this one has an aftermarket trim piece, retains the factory display. Nothing real difficult there. Just, again, get your little pry tools, little plastic pry tools such as this guy. And then essentially you can just pry up on the side and pull that right out. So we're going to commence here with hooking up the RCAs for the subwoofer. Fortunately, this head unit is equipped. We'll also drop a remote wire, so when the stereo turns on, the amplifier turns on, so it's not running constantly. And speaking of remote wires, if you buy an amp kit from a big box store, particularly one made by Scosche, they're going to provide this itty bitty teeny tiny wire. Do not use that. I've used that on a couple of installations just in a pinch, and I've had everything buttoned up and the amp won't turn on because this wire is so cheap and does not pass current. I've had to replace, on 2 installations now, I've had to pull that entire wire and run it again. So after I got everything buttoned up, I had to take it all apart again. Shame on me for buttoning everything up, but do not use that stuff. Find a much larger gauge of wire. This is white. It's not blue remote turn on wire. I get it. I actually have blue tape that I'll tape the end so we know that it's the blue remote turn on, but please do not use this stuff supplied in the kit. It is garbage. It does not work. Also, if you have a set of RCAs equipped with a wire in it, that wire is not for your remote wire. That wire is actually to ground to isolate any noise running through the wire. So always be sure to run a separate remote wire of a decent gauge and something that's going to pass through easily for you. So we have our RCA cable, remote wire run down basically to the back of the stereo area, down the passenger side here. Now everything's tucked up nice and tightly. I don't know if we can see, there should be some zip ties essentially holding it to what exists. Our power wire coming through the firewall, through the grommet again, and routed nicely through the kick panel here. We'll pick that up, pick up both wires, actually all 3, our power wire, remote, and our RCA. And we'll run them down through the carpet trough down here and back to the truck. So pardon the mess here, we decided to go with the Memphis amp, and it comes equipped with a bass knob. So this aftermarket kit for the Mustang actually has a pocket down here with a couple of USB ports.
Felt like right there in the middle would be a good spot. Normally I hang these kind of underneath the steering column, which is a nice convenient spot. However, as of recent, people have been hitting their knees on them, particularly me, so this was a nice little spot. The pocket's still useful, still shove a phone or whatever you feel like in there. Doesn't take up too much space. Alright, so back in the car here, we do have our subwoofer connections hooked up, our RCAs for that. We also did tap the line for the remote wire, which again, it ran a white wire. Do not ever use the Scotch wire, it is garbage. We have the trim piece in here with the bass knob wired up. Wires drop down to the passenger floorboard, so we can go ahead and put all this back in. So from here, we'll grab the head unit, grab the wire, which connects to the heat and air conditioning controls on the aftermarket bezel. We'll go ahead and shove the radio in. Make sure that has a little more space. There we go. Radio is held in with four 7mm bolts. For this job, I have a cordless screwdriver, which works really well. A couple of extensions. Get them all started here. Once we have them all started, we'll go ahead and tighten them down. At which point we can take the bezel and make sure we plug in a couple of items here. This one has a USB in the front of it here for a phone charger, so we'll go ahead and plug that back in. We will plug in the heat and air conditioning controls here that were routed up above, all the while making sure we tuck wires in nicely so they're not pinched. Just like that. And then last but not least, we have two 7mm bolts down here at the bottom, one on each side. Do not over tighten these. You notice there I kind of just let the cordless screwdriver spin in my hands, things don't get over tightened. Makes nice access for the bass knob right there. That actually worked out better than I expected. So I'm going to try my best here to show you the installation of the shifter console. First things first, there is a wire connector right here that connects into the buttons on the front of the console. So we'll connect that. And then there are two slots on the front which you slide into. And guys, it's really just as easy as popping it into place, just like that. Then the shifter bezel, what I've found here is the tabs that are closest to the front go to the forward of the vehicle. And that simply goes over the shifter and snaps right onto place. From there, close everything up. Everything's back together in the dash. So back at the passenger side, we have run and routed the wires for red power wire, which I showed earlier. We have our RCA wire right here. We have our white wire for remote, and we also have our telephone cord wire for our bass knob. So pretty simple here. The kick panel cover just pops out. I don't remember if I showed that. But essentially we're just running all of the wires down through the channel underneath the carpet. I added a few zip ties here and there to hold things into place, but essentially right here underneath the carpet. Back seat came out. There's really just two fasteners, don't require any tools, just push in on it and the seat pops up on both sides, one over there too. To get this side panel off, just for a little bit of access, there is a interior plug which needs to be pulled. Use a cat claw or those Harbor Freight interior tools, but that pulls right out, and then this will pull to the side. So for this installation, there is a wire harness running through here. We're just going to grab onto that. You see back there that white thing? I believe that is a side airbag. We certainly don't want to interfere with that, so we're going to run it where factory harnesses ran, right down here underneath the seat and back to the trunk. So we've got the interior back together, put on the premium sill plates, which I had laying around, but everything's buttoned up. See a little bit of the power wire, but unless your head's underneath the dash, I don't think you'll ever notice. No wires, kick panel's back in place. We've got the carpet back in, sill plate is in like I said. Went ahead and put our back panel back in, and we've got our wires routed next to the factory harness. Again, important to stay away from the factory airbag on this vehicle or any vehicle. I always tend to follow the where the manufacturers run the wires. Things are engineered so they don't get pinched, things like that. So next up, we'll reinstall the back seat and we'll move on to the trunk. Making some progress back here in the trunk. We did find a ground, not my favorite ground, but it is on a bracket down there. Ground wire routed right to that, so we'll see how that goes. Might need cleaned off, but I'm thinking it's going to be okay. Our subwoofer is going to go right here in the corner, so we got just enough wire to make that happen. The remote bass knob wire is a little short, but I think I can work with it. So got the trunk all buttoned up. There's any number of ways to do this. Essentially the spare wire kind of went down in the wheel well back here behind that panel, but it turned out pretty good. Not the greatest cable management. I don't normally prefer to mount an amplifier to the sub box, but in this application space was limited, so this is going to have to work. I have fired it up and tested it. It does run just fine. Needs some tuning, obviously, as to be expected, but for now, I think next thing is to mount the box down to the floor or somehow so it doesn't slide around back here. Have to figure that out. But it does just happen to fit right underneath in that corner there. Still leaves a reasonable amount of trunk space here. The tire should still be accessible. Might be a little tough to get it pulled up, but it will pull up. But let's get some brackets made and mount that down. Alright, we have the box mounted in. Just a couple of little straps, really just to kind of hold it into place so it's not sliding around or drifting corners and stuff like that. But got one on each side. We got one on the front, and then I had to make a custom one for down here. Essentially very short on the side up against the sub box, but it's in. So we'll do a sound test and call it a video. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Cars with Corey. Today we went ahead and put in an amplifier, subwoofer box, hooked to the factory stereo. Took lots of stuff apart, didn't break anything. Got everything to work on the first try. Just goes to show you kind of know what you're doing with wiring, which really isn't complicated, especially with car stereos, positive, negative. A couple of plugs, really isn't much to it. But it goes to show when you do things properly and get everything done as the way it was intended to be, things tend to work out. So thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, help me out. Really appreciate it.